Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. The silliest deaths in history. Sometimes it's your own pride that can get the best of you. This is Hans Steininger, and this is his beard. Hey, my eyes are up here. Looking like the wisest wizard in the world, Hans was a public spectacle in the 16th century and also a well-respected politician. Cause, I mean, come on, who are you gonna vote for? Majestic and marvelous beard boy Hans, or the lame and lackluster clean-shaven Franz? Und that is how I will be lowering taxes while simultaneously providing affordable healthcare and housing for all. Alright, but where's your beard? I don't have one. But behind that big bushel of bristles beats a kind heart, one that legitimately cared for his town and its people. So much so that Hans was elected as mayor for 6 consecutive terms for the town of Braunau am Inn, a town that resides on the border between modern-day Austria and Germany. It's also the birthplace of another famous facial hair haver, albeit far less loved by history, but that's another story. Measuring in at over 4.5 feet in length, Hans's big-ass beard was his defining feature, and was certainly a testament to his patience and care in many aspects in his life. If you can brush your beard, you can untangle legislative issues. If you can oil up your whiskers, you can lubricate the political machine. So it goes without saying that cosmetology and political science are of equal value. At least from a college degree standpoint. However, Hans's biggest asset would be his downfall, quite literally. On September 28, 1567, a fire broke out in the town, which was a much bigger threat back then than it is today. Since the extent of firefighting tactics were just pathetic pails of water, a single small fire could reduce your whole town to cinders real quick. Hans, who usually tucked his beloved beard into a leather pouch for safekeeping and uninhibited travel, let his lusciously long locks whimsically whip in the wind as he ran to help with the fire. Scuttling down some stairs in a panic, Hans had accidentally slammed a piggy right on his own facial pubes, causing him to slip and trip down the entire staircase. He snapped his neck, and the town was devastated. Not by the fire, but by the loss of their beloved mayor. Before being buried, the townsfolk had Hans's beard gently removed and chemically preserved, immortalizing his legacy. The forever facial hair is still on display in a museum in the town today. You know his ghost is pissed, though. Ever have an extreme case of the sleepy ha-has where you find anything and everything to be complete comedic gold to the point of not being able to even breathe? Now try to imagine this soggy scoop of Cheerios doing that. This is Chrysippus, a rather influential Greek Stoic philosopher in the 3rd century BC. In case you don't peruse that corner of YouTube, Stoicism is the philosophy that you only ever need to focus on what you can control in your life. Anything reasonably outside of that control, Hacunas Matatis, not my problemas. Which is a pretty solid philosophy, especially in this age of doom and gloom social media designed to make you perpetually paranoid and pissed off. Chrysippus was also a huge proponent of logical reasoning, having created an original system of propositional logic, stuff like if, then, and or statements that we use to describe the world around us today. For example, if you are not subscribed to this channel, then you're dead to me. Simple logic. The basic idea is that any and all things happen for a reason. Well, I'm sure Chrysippus would have a hard time understanding the logic and reasoning surrounding his rather untimely death. According to legend, Chrysippus, at the fermented old age of 73, got trashed at a feast. In his slizzard state, he had stumbled upon a donkey who was munching on some figs. Registering at least a 6.9 on the ancient Greek comedy scale, the masticating mule was a hilarious sight to behold, prompting Chrysippus to exclaim, quote, "Now give the donkey some pure wine to wash down the figs." This added punchline sent the Lord of Logic over the edge. Chrysippus reportedly hurled himself into a fit of laughter so intense that he had collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Despite some nearby partygoers attempting to help him, he had knocked himself dead with his own joke. But the question is, can you actually die from laughter? Sure you can. It's rare, but medically possible. If you laugh your ass off to the point of it being an uncontrollable fit, that actually puts a lot of stress on your heart. So if you have a weak heart, you're probably going to exacerbate some underlying conditions, leading to a heart attack. You also have the possibility of losing consciousness if you laugh yourself out of breath for long enough. but you have to hear or see something exceptionally funny for that to happen, so don't worry, you're safe here. Now, of course, this recount of events is debated by historians. The guy who documented this particular death was ancient Greek biographer Diogenes Laertius, who lived a few hundred years after Chrysippus' death, so he was far from an eyewitness. Diogenes nuts! On top of that, he also wrote an alternative, more mundane account of the comical death, simply writing that Chrysippus died of alcohol poisoning after drinking too much undiluted wine, but I guess he needed to spice some things up for his readers. If there was ever proof that the universe has a cruel sense of humor, then it's the curious case of American lawyer and politician Clement Vallandigham. Howdy. Though he resided in the Union state of Ohio during the mid-1800s, Clement was adamantly against the Civil War, calling it, quote, a wicked, cruel, and unnecessary war. Which is fine, but being a member of the Copperhead faction of the anti-war Democrats, Clement was a very vocal Confederate sympathizer, speaking out against President Lincoln and the abolition of slavery, to which Lincoln was all and sent him to the South to live amongst his Confederate companions in 1863. Clement, who was clearly not about that life, snuck aboard a ship and shipped himself off to Canada before sneaking back to his home state of Ohio to perform rather inconsequential political mumbo-jumbo for the next few years. But after the war was over, Clement attempted to run on political platforms while still advocating for slavery. However, he suddenly switched his views with the Democratic New Departure policy of 1865, which basically 180'd the Democratic Party's stance on slavery once they realized that it fell out of favor in the public's eye. So, being branded as a no-good slavery supporter for life meant the figurative death of his political career. Instead, he turned to a career in law, which would soon lead to his literal death. On June 17, 1871, Vallandigham met his demise while defending his client, Thomas McGeehan, a young fella accused of shooting and killing one Tommy Myers. Clement claimed that Myers had, in fact, not been murdered but accidentally shot himself with his own gun while getting up to stand. Clement vowed that he could demonstrate this before the court, proving McGeehan's innocence. And so he did. Now, when reenacting a scene that results in someone accidentally blowing a hole through their own tummy, you want to make sure that you have safety measures in place that would physically prevent you from doing the same thing. Clement didn't do that. Instead, he had mistakenly used a loaded pistol. While demonstrating the scene as Myers, Clement attempted to draw the seemingly harmless firearm from his coat pocket as he stood up. And he blew a hole through his own tummy, just like Myers. Clement Vallandigham died just 12 hours later from his injuries. The verdict? Not guilty. McGeehan was acquitted and was a free man. Until he was murdered a few years later, that is. You can tempt death all you like, but eventually, he's gonna get what's his. That's what big old Bobby Leach found out in 1926. Born in itty-bitty Britain, England in 1858, Leach grew up to be quite the daredevil. Unfortunately, most of Bobby's early life is lost to time, completely shrouded in mystery. We do know that around the 1880s, he had left boring old England for a more exhilarating life in the States. Apparently an excellent swimmer, Leach eventually landed a gig as a professional high diver with the greatest show on earth, the Barnum and Bailey Circus. There, he performed daringly dangerous feats in front of thousands of eager onlookers. This had quenched the adrenaline-thirsty void in his life for a while, but eventually he retired from this circus life at the age of 50 in order to extend his life expectancy a bit. But that logic was tossed aside rather quickly, as in the early 1900s, Bobby decided to settle down as a humble businessman at Niagara Falls. Blimey, that's a proper waterfall, isn't it? Initially content with just opening up a restaurant, Leach noticed the ever-increasing tourists flocking from afar to see a bunch of water spill over a cliff. So, this gave him an idea. The daredevil was back. Between 1906 and 1911, Leach performed various stunts around the falls, including parachuting from the nearby Honeymoon Bridge to the river below. Over the years, Leach continued to push the envelope, coming up with more and more dangerous stunts to draw larger and larger crowds. Eventually, he faced his biggest challenge, the falls themselves. And on July 25th, 1911, entombed in a customized giant metal barrel, Leach took the plunge. And survived. Sure, he had gashed his forehead, broken his jaw, and all of his kneecaps, but he was still kicking. Bobby Leach became the second person to survive the trip, right behind 63-year-old Annie Taylor. After recovering in the hospital for several months, Leach became a celebrity. Over the next several years, he had plans to make a second bound over the falls, but it never came to be. Why? Well, because in 1926 he went and slipped on a dang orange peel, snapping his leg in half, which went and got infected with gangrene, ultimately killing him a few days later. Remember that death always gets the last laugh. Having served the shortest presidential term in United States history, you know something must have gone down. Well, it was President William Henry Harrison's health bar. The withering president had a pretty impressive career before assuming office. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1791 at the age of 18 and quickly rose through the ranks, serving in the American Indian Wars, which sought to expand U.S. territory further west against native tribes. Which they did. Satisfied with his service, Harrison decided to retire from the military at 25 and toss his hat in the ring for a career in politics. Recognized for his leadership skills on the battlefield, then-President Guy John Adams gave Harrison control over the territory of Indiana as governor, with the goal of expanding that territory for statehood eligibility. One consequence of this territorial expansion was the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, which only further displaced natives from the area in order to allow more settlers to, well, settle. This success cemented Harrison's legacy, as Indiana would eventually become its own state in 1816. But leading military campaigns from afar, that's boring as shit. Harrison missed being in the middle of the action, so he came out from his military retirement to fight in the War of 1812, serving as a major general for the US Army against the smelly redcoats, who weren't too happy seeing the US's throbbing expansion. A bunch of people died, and the war ended in pretty much a stalemate, but the outcome solidified the US as a world power, being able to at least defend itself from a foreign power. This really boosted national morale and pride, and with no restrictions put in place, the US just kept on manifesting that destiny in the coming years. Now back in a time of peace and having successfully satisfied his war boner, Harrison fell back into politics, serving in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and eventually running for president. His opponent was 8th President Martin Van Buren, whose first term experienced an economic depression with the Panic of 1837. Of course, Van Buren was given the blame for the economic downturn, even though it began over a month before he was even in office. The economy stagnated, unemployment rose, and the people were properly pissed. So it's no surprise that when seeking re-election, it was now Harrison who would be the favorite to win. Aww. Harrison won in a landslide, 234 electoral votes to Van Buren's 60, but that wouldn't matter in about a month. Elected in 1841 at the age of 68, Harrison was getting on in his years. Either a stubborn old goat or a complete idiot, he had the habit of being extremely underprepared for the weather. For example, he delivered his inaugural speech in the bitter cold and rain for 2 hours straight, with no overcoat or weather-appropriate clothes.
Connected with the subject is the character of the currency. The idea of making it exclusively metallic, however well intended, appears to me to be fraught with...
Oh, this is gonna suck. Harrison continued to endure exposure to the elements over the next few weeks, eventually contracting a deadly case of pneumonia. Despite his doctors jacking him to the tits with drugs and relying on good old-fashioned bloodletting, Harrison died on April 4th, 1841, exactly 1 month after being elected. When you were a kid, did you ever try jumping off of a sofa using a blanket as a makeshift parachute, but you failed to calculate that the blanket had the proper coefficient of drag necessary to minimize your acceleration due to gravity, leaving you crashing to the floor in a possible concussion? Just me? Well, take that scenario and scale it up to adult size, except this is your blanket, and this is your couch. Meet Franz Reichelt, the mastermind behind the parachute suit prototype. An Austro-Hungarian tailor and inventor, Franz became hyper-fixated on developing a sort of wearable parachute. He had identified a gap in the market with the rise of humanity's newest invention, the powered aircraft. Seeing reports of pilots forced to launch themselves out of their airborne contraptions if things went south, Franz vowed to come up with a solution to save lives. So he got to work in 1910 with some initial designs, testing the prototypes by strapping them onto makeshift dummies and hucking them off of a 5-story ledge. Surprisingly, the dummies managed to hit the ground at less than fatal speeds. Not bad. But there was a problem. The prototype weighed 150 pounds. And no pilot's gonna lug all that extra weight onto an aircraft, even if it would potentially save their life. But Franz would not give up. After all, you have to fail many times before you succeed. But it did help that there was also some monetary encouragement. Turns out that France's Aeronautic Club held a parachute-esque design competition which offered a cash prize to the tune of 10,000 francs. Considering that the average wage of an unskilled French laborer at the time was only a few francs a day, that prize was nothing to sneeze at. Over the next year, Reichelt was unable to replicate his initial success with any of the lighter redesigns. But to his logic, it wasn't a design problem, it was a height problem. Anyone who has even taken a basic physics course knows that this is a bad idea. You fall exponentially faster the longer you're airborne thanks to acceleration due to gravity. But what's a bunch of stupid science shit gonna do to stop an avid inventor from fulfilling his dream and lining his pockets? Nothing. But the pavement will. But Franz, determined to test his designs from a higher height, pleaded with the Parisian Prefecture of Police to allow him to run an experiment from the Eiffel Tower. Despite numerous rejections, they eventually gave in. On the bitter cold morning of February 4th, 1912, and to the surprise of everyone, Franz arrived on site in his dumpy-looking parachute suit. Now, the police only gave Franz permission to perform this stunt on the grounds that dummies would be used, not that he would be doing the jumping himself. This guy was so confident in his invention, boasting to news journalists of how successful it was gonna be. But apparently the police didn't feel like stopping him, so after a bunch of preparations, Reichelt made the leap, but his parachute suit failed to properly deploy, so the poor fella plummeted 187 feet to his death, achieving nothing but a Franz-shaped dent in the cement. The worst jobs in history. If you ever think your job's crappy, try having to plunge into a pit of literal human doo-doo feces every single night. Way back in the day in good old England, some daring men made a career out of wading through human excrement. So-called gong farmers were tasked with draining out cesspits filled to the brim with offensive butt slop. The profession had existed for centuries, but it saw its height between the years of 1485 and 1603, also known as the Tudor period. Oi, I got a tutor for you. Since this was way before the invention of the turlet, people were content with just slamming their cheeks down in a public latrine to pinch off a quick loaf. The other problem was the lack of availability of somewhere to go. Towards the end of the 14th century, it's estimated that there was only one public bathroom per 2,000 people. Plus, keep in mind that all of that human waste was just piling up in a literal stone-lined hole in the ground, so you were just dropping logs onto a mountain of timber. The local government, realizing that this horrid threat to public health was fermenting beneath everyone's feet, took action to allow the construction of private outhouses and latrines in residential areas, as a way to disperse the smelly sewage. It didn't work all that well. So with dookie levels rising, help was needed to drain the pits. Enter the gong farmer, the term gong deriving from an Old English term meaning to go. They were also referred to as the much more mysterious and cooler sounding title of nightmen, as the only time that they were allowed to perform their duties was under the shroud of night, and that really sucked. There were no flashlights, spotlights, or illumination of any kind. You just had to hope that the moon was shining brightly to light your way through the filth. The nightmen would enter these cesspits and drain the contents using buckets and shovels. Excrement was loaded into barrels and carted off to be dumped near the River Thames. Don't worry, it was used as fertilizer later. Maybe. These men would be knee-deep, waist-deep, even neck-deep in the stuff, which had its own risks, the first and foremost being asphyxiation. Cesspits were often enclosed spaces with little to no ventilation, so the buildup of noxious and toxic gases was a very real threat. Although rare, a gong farmer could pass out from a lack of fresh air and drown in the waste. Another risk was poor maintenance. Cesspits were typically drained as needed, which, depending on the size of the thing, could be up to 2 years between sloppy scoops. Since these pits just sat there and rotted, it was common for stone walls to collapse in on the farmers while they harvested their crops. Any scrapes or bumps would certainly get infected, which could only lead to a painful death. But these high risks were met with high reward. Since the job was less than desirable, gong farmers made quite a healthy living, about 6 pence a day. Now, I'm not quite sure what that is in non-silly sounding money, but sounds pretty good. Problem is though, gong farmers perpetually reeked from their labors and were only permitted to live in certain areas of the city, with most of the public actively avoiding them and, well, treating them like crap. Now, if you're looking for a soul-crushing, body-breaking job that pays next to nothing, you're an idiot. but I could recommend that you apply for the occupation of chimney sweep. These services were all the rage in, you guessed it, England's Tudor period, but the job has existed for hundreds of years. Rapid urbanization led to the construction of a lot of buildings, and each one of them suckers needs a source of heat. Gotta keep them English toesies nice and warm during the miserable grey winter months until the arrival of the miserable grey summer months. So a lot of fireplaces and chimneys were built to meet that demand. You do know how a fireplace works, right? Make fire, fire make heat and smoke go up through chimney and blow out the top. But all of that burning of wood and coal creates lots of icky carbon-heavy flammable deposits that build up within the chimney. Big problem, cause if that's not properly cleared out, then things can just go, and there goes not only your house, but a few neighbors' houses as collateral damage. Well, the higher-ups didn't like the risk of their kingdom going up in smoke at any given time, so they mandated that chimneys must be swept at least 4 times a year or face heavy fines. Thus, the employment of chimney sweeps became critical. The problem, though, is that chimneys at the time weren't exactly designed for human entry and cleaning. Bugger. Most flue networks in the building were grouped together on the roof, but could have sharp turns as they angled out towards their respective fireplaces or furnaces. To make matters even worse, regulations shrunk flue sizes down to as little as 9 by 9 inches. This made it nearly impossible for full-grown men to slip through the cracks. The solution? Children. Really young children. Adorable wide-eyed orphans were yoinked from poor houses and taken on as apprentices called climbing boys, with opportunities to one day grow into master sweepers themselves, if they lived that long. If it wasn't obvious, chimney sweeping was extremely dangerous, especially for the little limber lads. Boys as young as 6 years old were sent up chimneys and told to get scrubbing. The physical dangers were abundant, as several children had died from getting stuck or horribly burned from scaling the scalding bricks. Keep in mind that these fireplaces were almost always in use, so those chimneys were hot and ready like a carry-out pizza. Now, if the cramming didn't kill you, the scrubbing would. Soot and creosote, the organic carbonaceous byproducts of burning wood and coal, are carcinogenic. So if you're trapped in a confined space just scrub-a-dub-dubbing away while sucking up hits of cancer-causing black powder all day day, things are not going to turn out well for you. But it actually wasn't your lungs that you needed to worry about. No, it was your balls. Scrotal squamous cell carcinoma, also known as chimney sweeps carcinoma, or just straight up scrotal cancer, was a death sentence. Something I didn't mention until now was that the young children, as a way to fit easier into the narrow hot chimneys, often went commando. No shirt, no shoes, no pants, but all service. The constant exposure to soot and such led to the development of tumors on their nethers. Once developed, they were lucky if they had a few years left in them. Sure, your sack is out of whack, but damn, that chimney's clean. You've probably heard of the radium girls, young women of the workforce that would paint luminous numbers and hands onto timepieces in the early 1900s. Well, this is similar. Towards the end of the 19th century, matchmaking was a pretty lucrative business. Not like pairing couples up, but making literal matches. By the late 1800s, there were about 25 matchmaking factories across Great Britain, employing over 4,000 chaps and chapettes. The process, as with most industries at the time, involved working with some nasty chemicals. The flavor of the day here was white phosphorus, an unstable compound that burned fiercely when ignited. You know, perfect for the few seconds that you would need to set something ablaze. On top of being both easily ignitable and violently reactive with oxygen, it had the triple whammy of also being extremely toxic. Of all matchmaking jobs, roughly half were involved in the direct handling of white phosphorus, with over 80% of the phosphorus fingerers being young women. These women would come to be known as matchstick girls. Day in and day out, these women were tasked with packaging the dipped matchsticks, with an entire workforce handling as many as 10 million across a 10-hour shift, meeting the demand of the 250 million matches being burned in Britain every single day. Remember that fire is what got people through the day. Need to cook? Fire. Need to keep warm? Fire. Need to see in the dark? Fire. Need to shrink your overhead? Fire. It was the biggest blessing humanity has ever discovered, and you can now summon it out of a little box in your pocket. The obvious problem is that fiddling with all of those fickle phosphorus fumes physically fucked you up. It was very common for both men and women to form phosphoric necrosis of the jaw. The condition, nicknamed phossy jaw, developed after the long-term exposure to phosphorus fumes. Initial symptoms included simple toothaches, which evolved into complete tooth loss, abscesses, swelling of the gums, and complete necrosis of the jaw. To put it simply, your jaw rotted off. If you did get the jaw rot, there was about a 1 in 5 chance that the rest of your body would be rotting not long after from contracting an even worse condition known as death. In 1888, over 1,400 matchstick girls, fed up with this blatant disregard for their safety, decided to strike, demanding better pay, working conditions, and abolition of unfair fines and penalties. The strike lasted for 2 weeks before demands were met and accepted. 20 years later, in 1908, the British House of Commons completely banned the use of toxic white phosphorus in favor of the much safer and less toxic red phosphorus, which is what we use in matches today, but not in the match head, on the striking pad. So remember to light one up for the matchstick girls. If you think your job's exhausting, try hauling an entire freaking ship up a river with your bros. These are burlaks, or barge haulers. They hauled barges. Typically dirt poor peasants just looking for enough coin to eat for a week, these men were tasked with strapping on a strap and using whatever strength they had left in them to pull in ships from the Caspian Sea all the way up the Volga River in the days of the Russian Empire. Since ship traffic was near constant thanks to strong trade, burlaks were in high demand to carefully guide the vessels up the Volga. But why couldn't the ships just sail up the river, you might ask? Because the Volga flows outward towards the Caspian Sea, and there were rarely favorable winds to propel a ship up the river, lest you risk beaching your entire ship on the banks. So why not hire a bunch of exhausted and desperate poor people to do the work instead? Whoa, slow down fellas, there's no need for us to be Russian. Depending on the load size, burlak groups could range from just a few men up to 150 fellas pulling a single ship. But there was a moment of respite for these workers. See, one advantage to working in the Russian Empire was the cold winters. Can't exactly move ships upstream when the waterways are completely frozen over. So burlaks were seasonal, working dawn until dusk, thaw till frost. But since the combination of being poor and not working meant certain death, the men would pick up odd jobs in the winter to barely scrape by.
Hey, I make a duck. Smudgy, smudgy.
At the beginning of the 19th century, it is estimated that about 600,000 burlaks worked in the Russian Empire, but the evolution of ship technology and the invention of the steam-powered ship rendered the job obsolete. By the end of the 19th century, the burlak profession had vanished over the horizon. Now I know what you're thinking, so stop it. This has nothing to do with milking your own snake or giving little pinches to little snake nips, which don't exist. Snakes aren't mammals. The job of a snake milker was to extract their venom from their fangs. He looks cute, right? Think again. Snake venom was highly coveted for use in early warfare as a biological weapon, granting you the ability to proc tick damage over time to your enemies if you weren't able to finish them off yourself. Perhaps the best weapons of choice to get slathered in the stuff were arrows. Lethality of arrows varied greatly. Take one in the skull? Yeah, sure, you're dead as a doornail. But take one in a less critical spot like an arm or a leg, assuming you don't sever an artery, and you might just live to see another day. But that all goes out the window if the arrow tip was dipped in some venomous drip. Quite a few civilizations have been noted for using envenomed or poisoned arrows throughout history. You've got the Khoisan people of southern Africa who have been using poisoned arrows for thousands of years in hunting large prey, and the Harmatilians who used viper venom against an invading Alexander the Great. But no army employed the use of snake venom better than the Scythians. Also duking it out against Alexander the Great, the Scythians developed their own iconic poison for warfare, combining not only viper venom, but also putrefied human blood and excrement. Even minor scrapes from their weapons were lethal. So on top of dealing with being envenomed, you also dealt with the horrors of gangrene and tetanus. So with all that said and done, yeah, snake milkers. Like I said, it was their job to wrangle and wrestle up enough snakes to meet the demand of entire armies. But luckily, this wasn't a time for catch and release practices. Kill the snakes, take their venom. That's the job. Of course, that is easier said than done. By nature, snakes are shy little fellas and pretty hard to find. Chances are you get struck before you even noticed one. One catch of their fangs is enough for it to be game over. Snake milkers were considered lucky if they even managed to survive a single round of collecting.
I think it's time for a quick science lesson.
Venoms can be sorted into three main types: neurotoxic, hemotoxic, cytotoxic, yikes. Neurotoxins strike and destroy all your nerves. You're agonized and paralyzed, as you can observe. Hemotoxins target all your healthy blood, thinning down or clotting up, so now you're done for, bud. Cytotoxins focus on killing all your cells, so you can probably guess that you won't be doing well. Just avoid snakes, and you'll be doing fine. I know you fellas and fellettes just love a good rhyme. So to close this chapter out, yes, snake milkers still exist nowadays, though only for medical research and developing antivenom rather than biological warfare. Or so we think. Imagine getting ready to charge onto a battlefield to either invade a country or defend your own. You see your fellow soldiers gearing up for battle with their trusty firearms, and you're given a drum. Ugh. I gotta fight. Drummers, believe it or not, were a critical part of warfare in the days of yore. Since there were no such things as radios or more instantaneous methods of communication, drummer boys were employed and trained to maintain order on the battlefield, signaling commands, attacks, retreats, and everything in between. Peaking in popularity during the American Civil War, drummer boys were typically in their teenage years or young adulthood, though some more famous drummer boys were much younger. Little Charlie King of the Union Army died in battle at the age of just 13, being the youngest casualty in the Battle of Antietam. Itty Bitty Johnny Clem ran away from home and was taken in by the Union Army as a drummer boy at the ripe old age of 9. Just a few years later, the little fella fought in the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863 at the age of 12, where he shot and killed a Confederate soldier.
What you gonna do? Shoot?
He was promoted to sergeant, eventually retiring from the United States Army in 1915 as a brigadier general. But that's a rare occurrence. In reality, it would have gone more like this. Despite what people may think, drummer boys did not lead troops into battle. That would be stupid. Instead, they would relay commands from behind soldier lines, though they were still known to be valuable targets. If you break the communication line, you break down the army. Outside of combat, drummer boys had a wealth of other responsibilities, such as carrying messages between units, assisting battlefield surgeons with amputations, carting the wounded up the field, fetching supplies, or burying the dead. They very rarely carried weapons of their own, so if they had to defend themselves in the heat of battle, they were pretty shit out of luck. If you wanted to be one of the most influential people in all of England but don't have a drop of royal blood in you, you'd want to squeeze into the role of the groom of the stool, a job requiring you to get up real close and personal with the king or queen at the time. Look, we all have to go once or 12 times a day, so someone as prestigious and important as the king is gonna need help doing so. I mean, imagine feeling the sudden urge to blow out your britches, but you have to fight through said britches to accomplish the mission. Grooms of the stool assisted the monarch with any labors regarding biological movements. This included helping the removal of clothing, preparation of the lavish and luxurious royal ship box, and the removal of the splendiferous solids, but not before their proper examination. Yeah, that's right. Grooms of the stool were not only tasked with cleaning up the royal slurry, but making sure that the passings were healthy, taking notes of any abnormalities in appearance or frequency. These notes would be passed on to the king's personal physician to diagnose any possible ailments. Well, that's not very helpful, is it? After the log was sent down the river, the groom of the stool would also assist in the cleanup effort, either by handing the king his own personal cleaning cloth, or by taking up wiping duties themselves. Now you might think that this job sucked, but it was actually highly coveted and well respected, as grooms of the stool had access to the king outside of the public eye, allowing for valuable private conversations. Commonly high-ranking nobles or politicians, grooms of the stool were known to have influence in many formal rulings, laws, or personal life. So that Anne Boleyn chick's hot, right? No. The first documented groom of the stool dates all the way back to 1495 under King Henry VII. The role continued to evolve over the years to the title of groom of the stole, though they were more so referred to as either the gentleman or gentlewoman of the bedchamber, depending on the monarch in charge, with responsibilities eventually focusing solely on the king or queen's wardrobe. The position was held for over 400 years until being formally discontinued under King Edward VII in 1901.
History's good as boys.
Being a good boy is not limited to any one animal. It could be a dog, a cat, a bat, a rat, or even your 4-year-old little cousin when he isn't kicking your shins. That being said, our first good boy is Gustav. Ever since he was just a little embryo wriggling in his egg, he wanted to serve his country. So when it was time to leave the nest, he decided to enlist in the military, despite parental pressures not to. After some intense training with his new human counterpart, Frederick Jackson of Cosham, Gustav earned his wings and was officially made a service pigeon for the British Royal Air Force during World War II. So which one is yours? Oh, that handsome little pigeon right in the middle there. Ugh, pervert. Early in his career, Gustav was part of the Belgian resistance, carrying messages out of German-occupied Belgium. But since the Germans had previously occupied Belgium for 4 years during World War I, the Belgians knew the drill. Oh honey, it looks like the Germans are back. I'll go get the mallet. After a long, successful run of sending messages in and out of Belgium, Gustav would be assigned his most important role yet. On June 6, 1944, Gustav was aboard an Allied landing ship headed towards the beaches of Normandy. If you know your history, you're familiar with that date being D-Day, when Allied forces decided to penetrate a very German France. Unfortunately, our feathered friend was not well versed in combat, so he was tasked with delivering critical news back to the UK about the mission. Gustav held the message in his little footsie and took wing, 150 whole miles against a 30-mile-an-hour headwind. Bro was flapping. After just over 5 hours of continuous flight, the message was received, being the first official update on D-Day's mission status since the fleet went radio silent to avoid detection. For his service, Gustav was given a Dickin. Yeah, a Dickin Medal for his bravery, which is the animal equivalent of the British Victoria Cross or the US Medal of Honor. Gustav eventually retired from service and lived out the rest of his days with his best friend and former trainer, Fred Jackson. He went to the great nest in the sky as a war hero and an official good boy. By the end of the war, a total of 32 carrier pigeons were awarded a Dickin Medal. For instance, the comically but fashionably named William of Orange, who saved over 2,000 soldiers with a single message carried over 250 miles in just over 4 hours. 10 years after his retirement, he was reportedly a, quote, grandfather of many outstanding racing pigeons. Our next good boy was actually a good girl with a badass name. Meet Sergeant Reckless, a United States Mongolian warhorse during the Korean War. And no, that's not just a funny title like calling a rabbit Captain Puffers. Reckless actually held the rank of Staff Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. This absolute tank of a warhorse was purchased in 1952 off of a stable boy in Seoul, South Korea for 250 smackers. Apparently, the young fragile boy needed money to buy an artificial leg for his apparently even more fragile sister. Always some kind of Disney Pixar tragic backstory, isn't it? Reckless was taken in by the United States Marine Corps and trained to be a pack horse for a regiment specializing in anti-tank armaments. Not surprisingly, the platoon took to her very quickly, and she was immediately one of the gang, allowed to roam freely amongst the camp and poke her head in around the tents. Do you mind? She was known to eat nearly anything that was available. Chocolate, eggs, beer, the Marines' treasured supply of delicious and nutritious crayons. She even once ate a small pile of poker chips, if you could believe that. Alright fellas, I'm all in. Oh god damn it, I fold. Being a pack horse and all, Reckless's main duty was to carry supplies and ammunition to the battlefront, but she even managed to carry wounded off of the field to safety. And she was a pretty smart girl, learning her supply routes after only a few trips, unlike me who still uses the GPS to make sure I take the same exit that I've taken 50 times before.
Recalculating. Idiot.
But Reckless's claim to fame came in March of 1953 during the Battle for Outpost Vegas. In a single day, this heroic equine managed to make 51 resupply trips to the front lines solo. No handler needed. Across those trips, she totaled over 9,000 pounds of ammunition over 35 miles of travel. She is the definition of understanding the assignment. She did sustain 2 minor wounds in the battle, but was promoted to corporal shortly after the battle had ended, with another promotion to sergeant after the entire Korean War ended. For her services, she was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, a Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal, and was included in her unit's Presidential Unit Citations, among other military honors. Yeah, nothing could stop this anti-tank warhorse. Next up, Simon. Look at this handsome little man. Now, before you comment, no, this isn't Unsinkable Sam. This is Simon. How do I know? Well, his tag is for the HMS Amethyst, which is the ship that Simon served on, but I'll get to that in a bit. Just know that most of, if not all, stories of Unsinkable Sam mistakenly use Simon's picture instead, with his tag cropped out. It's quite the scandal, and I won't stand for it. Anyway, in 1948, on a cold Chinese morning in China, little Simon was doing cat things in a dockyard in Hong Kong. He was found by a 17-year-old naval seaman named George Hickenbottom, who was a crew member of the locally docked British frigate, the HMS Amethyst. But little Simon was not in such good condition. He was estimated to be about a year old at this point and was pretty malnourished. I'm going to keep you and love you forever. Meow. And so, Simon was smuggled onto the ship. However, due to small obvious signs of cat activity, Simon was almost immediately discovered, but was instantly adored by the crew. Because, I mean, come on. How could you not? Look at him. It ended up being a solid deal as Simon would hunt rats aboard the vessel, providing him a reliable source of food and ridding the crew of pests. Everything seemed well and good on a mission up the Yangtze River until the incident. Halfway up the river, the Amethyst came under fire from a group of Chinese People's Liberation Army field guns. The little bastards were absolutely relentless. The rounds struck the captain's quarters where Simon was stationed. He sustained serious wounds but was rushed to the medical bay for treatment. His burns were tended to and shrapnel was removed, but he was not expected to survive. But you should never doubt Simon. The fearless little feline ended up making a full recovery and went straight back to work because them rats got too comfy with him being out of commission for a bit. Simon's KC skyrocketed, along with the crew's morale. Mate's the captain, he's fucking dead. Don't ruin this for us. After the incident, Simon became an instant celebrity, gaining publicity all over the world. For his services, he was granted the Dickon Medal, a Blue Cross Medal, and the Amethyst Campaign Medal. He was even given the rank of Able Sea Cat for his exceptional rat hunting abilities. Little Simon was a huge star. When he was finally able to move to his new home in England, Simon was required to be placed in quarantine per regulations. It was here that Simon tragically contracted a virus and was granted 50% opacity on November 28, 1949 at just 2 years of age. The entire Amethyst crew and hundreds of other adoring fans attended his funeral in the Ilford Animal Cemetery in East London, where he loafs bonily to this day. Moving on, we have this prestigious primate right here, Corporal Jackie the Baboon. His story begins in the 1910s in South Africa when he was found roaming around a farm. The owner, Albert Marr, took Jackie in as a pet because why not have a pet baboon? Over the next few years, the two grew close and were like family, but of course, the world decided to slam a wedge into the family as well as millions of other families around the globe when World War I broke out. Albert was drafted into the South African Army in 1915 but refused to leave Jackie at home, to which Albert's commanding officers were like, alright, the baboon can come. And so, Jackie was made the mascot for the 3rd South African Infantry Regiment, complete with his own little uniform with hat, rations, and his own little paybook. To no surprise, he was adored by the regiment. In true soldier fashion, Jackie would salute his superior officers, march with the regiment, eat with his own fork and knife, and would even light other soldiers' cigarettes. He was such a good boy. Outside of just entertainment and morale, Jackie proved to be a valuable asset to the team. His heightened senses allowed him to be alerted to incoming attacks well before human soldiers would be able to. The war did end up taking Jackie and Albert far from home, with one of their first major combat encounters being the Battle of the Somme in 1916 France. Both Jackie and Albert survived quite a few high casualty battles across their tour. While serving in Egypt, Albert was shot in the shoulder, and Jackie stayed with him and tended to his wounds while awaiting medical aid. Jackie, I don't know if I'm gonna make it, buddy. Nonsense, Albert. Despite both him and Albert sustaining wounds, they both survived the war. Jackie was awarded a Medal of Valor for his bravery and was promoted to corporal. Both he and Albert returned home to South Africa. Although Jackie managed to survive years under fire during the war, he ultimately perished in a fire in 1921 at home. But he was still a good boy. Now, unless you're a Hollywood elite, you don't often want to become friends with a natural predator. But the Polish military had a different idea in 1942 during a little-known event called World War II. A Syrian brown bear cub was adopted and given to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company of the Polish military. The troops instantly loved the bear because what else was there to do? They ended up naming him Wojciech, which loosely translates to Happy Warrior because he was a happy boy indeed. The troops raised the cub by feeding it condensed milk from a vodka bottle and then eventually various fruits and syrups. The bear grew attached to the soldiers, copying their every move. When the soldiers slept, he slept. When it was time for a nice morning coffee and cigarette, Wojciech would drink coffee and eat a cigarette. When being saluted, Wojciech would salute back. He was an ideal and loyal companion, despite being a giant fucking bear. After the company was assigned to fight alongside the British during the Italian campaign, the British displayed their signature racism against bears, forbidding Wojciech from being transported with the troops since he wasn't a soldier. So, as a big Pierre Doche to the Brits, Wojciech was immediately enlisted as a private into the Polish military. Oh, so you can have pigeons but you draw the line at bears? Whatever. Now officially being part of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, his main job was to transport crates of ammunition to troops, which he was very successful at doing. He would lift large crates of artillery shells onto trucks, a job that normally required the strength of 4 men. It was noted that he never dropped a single crate, lest he obliterate his entire fan base and you wouldn't be hearing much about him today, other than that one idiot bear who dropped a bomb and killed everyone. For his work, he was promoted to corporal and became the official symbol of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Once World War II peacefully concluded, Wojciech spent the rest of his days in the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, where he would be frequently visited by his military pals. Adoring fans would often toss cigarettes for Wojciech to munch on as a treat. He kicked the honeypot 16 years later at the age of 21. At ease, soldier. Although he never received any medals for his service, Wojciech was beloved by many across Europe and is immortalized with several statues across Poland, the UK, and even Italy. History's deadliest snipers. Oh, my mug. If there was ever a true patriot that answered his country's call of duty, it would have to be this 5'3" snow cone of glee. This is Simo Hauha. But don't let that smile fool you. It was the last thing hundreds of Soviet soldiers would see before being no-scoped out of life's lobby. If they ever even caught a glimpse of him, that is. Born as a Finnish farmer baby on a farm in Finland in 1905, Simo's childhood consisted mainly of helping out the daily farm chores like tilling soil, harvesting crops, petting a cow or two, and most notably, hunting game. A skill which he started to develop a real knack for. At age 17, Simo volunteered to join Finland's Civil Guard. During his volunteer work, the rather reclusive Simo stood out amongst his peers with his innate ability to handle a rifle. There's never a more iconic duo than reclusive children and firearms. Simo repeatedly outgunned his colleagues in tons of competitions, performing feats that would make you go, he's pretty good. One such feat was sniping a small target 6 times in a minute, 150 meters away, with a bolt-action rifle. For my American audience, it's like sniping a Happy Meal 6 times across 1.5 football fields in under a minute with no fancy scopes. This shit made the Finns go absolutely bonkers, but this would pale in comparison to what Simo would accomplish down the road. Fast forward to 1939. The Russian Empire, now identifying as the Soviet Union, decides to bomb themselves right on the Finnish-Soviet border. Why, you ask? To start a war, of course. The Winter War. The Soviets wanted some of that Finland, so with a few Reds dead, it was time for redemption. The Soviet Union framed Finland for the bombing, which, my dearest viewer, is called a false flag operation. Want to start a war but don't feel like being viewed as the instigator? Simply attack your own people and convince everyone that it was someone else. Problem solved. But the ill-prepared Soviets would soon regret their actions. See, Soviet Supreme Leader fella Joseph Stalin was a bit of a paranoid Peter. He had Control-Alt-Deleted almost all of his smartest and most competent military strategists and leaders during the Great Purge, just to make sure that they wouldn't try to figuratively, or literally, backstab him. The result? A completely incompetent Red Army showing up in the snowy white Finnish fields wearing dark brown uniforms. This meant that the enemy were easy pickings for old Slick Simo. So, clad in his iconic white camouflage and equipped with his trusty M28-30 Mosin Nagant and Suomi KP-31 submachine gun, Simo Hauha would spend the next 98 days racking up 542 confirmed kills, earning the moniker the White Death.
a name that evoked inspiration for the Finnish and terror for the Soviets. Quick side note, confirmed kills require another person to confirm them. Basically they're saying, yep, they killed that guy, I saw it happen. It's just a way to prevent egotistical snipers from claiming that they killed thousands when they were in fact just sitting there with their dicks in their hands. Anyway, Simo absolutely terrorized the Soviet forces. Having set up multiple vantage points in front of and behind enemy lines, he avoided major detection for months. Simo would enter a nest at dawn, packing down the snow and pouring water over it, giving it the proper nutrients to grow into big, strong ice. This not only stabilized his rifle, but prevented any kick-up when popping shots, which is usually a dead giveaway for a sniper's position. He even munched on snow to mask his own breath trails. When taking aim, Simo relied solely on his iron sights, not as a flex, but for tactical reasons. For one, he wasn't well trained in using scopes, so he stuck with what he knew best. He also knew that using a scope required you to raise your head ever so slightly to look into the scope properly. Those extra inches of dome exposure could mean life or death. Not to mention the fact that scopes fog up in the winter and also like to reflect sunlight, creating a glint off of the glass like a giant neon billboard saying, "Look over here, I'm a fucking sniper." It wasn't until March 6, 1940 that Simo would feel the searing hot pain of his own mortality hit him right in the face. Oh wait, that was an explosive bullet fired from a Soviet rifle. Those things were banned from warfare in 1868, by the Russians no less. The bullet had ripped through Simo's face and destroyed his left jaw, rendering him unconscious and, for a little while, presumed dead.
He was later rescued and hospitalized, undergoing several reconstructive surgeries, eventually regaining consciousness on March 13th, the day that the Winter War ended.
Unfortunately, Simo's farmland was lost to the Soviets after the war, but the Finnish government was all, "Nah, we got you, bro," and granted him new land to start over. And just as he was before the war, Simo happily resumed his life as a humble and reclusive farmer. He passed away peacefully at the age of 96 in 2002, 11 years after witnessing the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now on the other side, the Soviet Union had their own fair share of deadly snipers. And by that, I mean most of the deadliest snipers in history hailed from the great communist regime. So either their sniper training programs were top-notch, or they had solid propaganda skills. Or both. I have to say, it seems like the harder it is to pronounce the name, the better of a sniper they were. But for the Soviet Union, we will focus on one Lyudmila Pavlichenko, also known as Lady Death. Born in the Russian Empire in 1916, Lyudmila began developing her sharpshooter skills as a wee lass while competing in various youth marksman contests. Unfortunately, shooting guns doesn't pay the bills. But building them does. While working at a local armaments factory, she felt she was a little bit underappreciated and underpaid, so she enrolled herself in university to become a historian. In her spare time though, she continued to develop her marksman skills by attending sniping school, courtesy of the Red Army. That's a good thing too, cause it's June 1941 and there's someone at the door. It's the Germans. They're invading. Now with all these krauts going sour, Lyudmila formally volunteered for service. Because of her sniping classes, she was assigned to the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division as one of 2,000 female snipers. Lyudmila was now ready to live up to her full potential as a respected Red Army soldier. Yeah, she ended up digging a lot of trenches. And thanks to several weapon shortages, Lyudmila wasn't even equipped with a gun. She was only given a single grenade as a weapon. It wasn't until one of her slightly injured comrades gave her his M1891 30 Mosin Nagant that she was even capable of doing any damage. Her first instance of drawing blood was picking off 2 Nazi officers over 1,300 feet away.
Hans, you've got to try this strudel, it's to die for. Oh my god, Franz, you are always so literal.
And she was just getting started. Over the next several months, she fought through the Siege of Odessa, found love, immediately lost it to a mortar shell, fought in the Siege of Sevastopol, trained other snipers, and received numerous promotions, racking up a final confirmed kill count of 309 soldiers, including 36 Axis snipers, although it is believed that her true kill count could be much higher. In 1942, Lyudmila took a page out of her late husband's book and was hit in the face by mortar shrapnel. She was quickly evacuated from battle and treated for her injuries, spending about a month in the hospital. Instead of returning to the front lines, however, she served as a propagandist for the Soviet Union, granting her the title of Lady Death. She toured the United States and Canada, telling stories of her combat experiences in hopes of inspiring the Allies to launch more aggressive campaigns against the Axis powers. But Japan already gave a wealth of inspiration to the United States in 1941. Ludmila was actually the first Soviet citizen to be received by a US president. What sucks though is that her time in the US wasn't all that great thanks to the US media. Instead of asking important questions about her service and her experiences as a wartime soldier, the American media instead focused on dumbass unimportant questions about her appearance and her style of dress. Hey toots, killing hundreds of fascists is cool, but what's with the ugly skirt? Even after her propaganda trips, Ludmila never returned to battle. She continued to serve as a sniping instructor for the Red Army until the end of World War II, after which she went back to university and fulfilled her dream of becoming a historian. She then died of a stroke in 1974 at the age of 58, and to this day, she is considered to be the deadliest female sniper in all of history. Let's take a skip across the pond to the Great White North where we find our next marksman. This is Francis Pegamagabo, or as his future syllable-sensitive colleagues would call him, Peggy. Born with a tragic backstory of family loss, poverty, and disease, Pegamagabo was destined for a great hero arc. Raised according to the cultural customs and traditions of the Ojibwe Native American tribe, Pegamagabo was taught to hunt, fish, and be one with nature, growing into a healthy and disciplined young man, something that Canada would soon be in dire need of thanks to the efforts of a Serbian, a gun, and one dead Austro-Hungarian Archduke thousands of miles away. Great Britain had entered the fray of World War I in August of 1914, lumping Canada into the mix by default because, British territory. Since it is a war and all, Canada needs troops to lob onto the front lines. Well, guess who's at the front door to volunteer? That's right, Francis Pegamagabo. Now, the Canadian government at the time preferred their soldiers to be a little whiter, but he'll do. And so, at just 23 years old, Pegamagabo was a full-fledged maple syrup soldier. His first assignment was getting hucked over to Europe for basic training in England. Thanks to a pretty solid hunting level, he netted himself a job as both a scout and a sniper. His first taste of battle would be one of the most infamous of the Great War, the Second Battle of Ypres in April of 1915. This is about the time that the Germans started deploying chlorine gas as a way to flush out Allied soldiers. This was a dense, heavy gas that crept over the landscape and completely suffocated any soldier caught in its death cloud. Super effective in trench warfare, which is what World War I was all about. Equipped with his standard issue Canadian Ross rifle, a powerhouse in both range and accuracy but lacking in reliability, Pegamagabo fought his way across the Western Front. After the Second Battle of Ypres, where he actually gained fame for his ability to successfully carry messages across the battlefield with zero regard for his own safety, Peggy found himself in the Battle of the Somme, one of the deadliest battles of the Great War. Despite getting capped in his leg, Peggy had continued success in delivering critical information across the Allied front. Bro was like an instant messenger. But his next moves, however, would cement Pegamagabo in the history books for his selflessness and bravery. You see, he would often leave the safety of his battalion's trench into what is known as no man's land, the uninhabitable area between trenches just brimming with desolation and despair. Getting caught there meant certain death, as you'd be found in the crosshairs of an enemy rifle within seconds. That is, unless your name is Francis Pegamagabo. This dude would just weave in and out of gunfire, loot the dead for some spare ammunition, and bring it back to his fellow soldiers so that they could continue fighting. Legend has it that he actually injured his back from the sheer weight of the ammunition and the absolute brass balls that he carried around. Not only would he brave no man's land for restocking missions, but for recon as well. He would be able to scope out enemy weapons posts, vantage points, and defensive structures. Now, unfortunately, there's not too many juicy stories explicitly about his sniping abilities, but throughout the various battles he fought through, Francis Pegamagabo had accumulated 378 confirmed kills with an unreliable rifle, as well as being credited with capturing over 300 German soldiers. By the time the war was over, he achieved the rank of corporal and was awarded various medals for his service. He returned home as the most decorated indigenous soldier of the war and is renowned as the single most effective sniper of the Great War. One might say that the Germans took a pretty good pegging. But his service was not without consequence. Over the years, the old pegster racked up a fair amount of physical and psychological damage. Although a war hero overseas, he had returned to Canada to live in poverty and neglect as a native in the very country he fought for. And over the years, he would become an outspoken activist for native rights until his death in 1952 at the age of 61. In 2016, a bronze statue was commissioned and placed in his hometown of Parry Sound, forever immortalizing his noble military service. Just a stone's throw to the south, you have the absolute beacon of freedom that is the United States of America. I should know. I live there. And so did our last sniper, U.S. Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock. Ever since tasting his first crayon, Hathcock knew he wanted to be a Marine. It also helped that his papa was a World War II veteran, bringing home spoils of war for his kid to play soldier with. In 1959, Hathcock had celebrated his 17th birthday, blew out his candles, and immediately enlisted in the Marine Corps.
That's my boy!
During basic training, Hathcock impressed many of his fellow soldiers on the shooting range. He had qualified as an expert-level marksman, setting records left and right, one being a 248 out of a possible 250 on a mastery range, a record that remained until the course was formally retired, so that very much still stands in my opinion. His continued sharpshooter skills earned him recognition as a Marine Corps Distinguished Marksman in 1965. But just a year later in 1966, Hathcock's skills would be put to the test as he began deployment in the Vietnam War. Throughout his 2 tours of Vietnam, he racked up an impressive 93 confirmed kills with his Winchester Model 70 rifle. Doesn't sound that impressive. You say from behind your computer or phone. But let me tell you why you're wrong. During the Vietnam War, in order for a kill to be considered confirmed and count towards any official kill count, each kill must have been verified by the sniper spotter as well as a third party, usually an officer. But since you can't just have 2 people sitting around all day waiting to confirm kills, most wouldn't be considered confirmed. So while Hathcock tallied 93 confirmed kills on paper, his real count is believed to be much greater, more than 300. Now, this sort of efficacy as a sniper gained him quite the reputation amongst the enemy. During his tours, Hathcock would find himself pitted against enemy snipers wishing to claim the bounty on the elusive white feather, a name befitting of the man who carried a white feather in his hat. Hey, it's better than Captain Sweaty Nips. What? It's hot out here. But Hathcock didn't just snipe with his Winchester rifle. For a while, he actually held the record for the longest documented kill at 2,500 yards, or just under 1.5 miles, with a scoped 50 caliber Browning machine gun. Hathcock's other claim to fame is when he took out an enemy sniper merely by noticing the glint of light from the enemy's scope. Remember when I told you that Sima Hauha hated scopes? Tools can really be your downfall. After noticing the glimmer of light on the horizon, Hathcock took a shot at the enemy and hit his mark. What he would soon realize, though, was that he made an insanely lucky shot. When going to confirm the kill, the sniper was found to have been shot through the scope of his rifle and through his eye. A shot that Hollywood loves recreating in war movies. Cut! Remember Saving Private Ryan? Well, you better, because I'm not showing any clips. God, I love that movie. Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, Paul Giamatti for like 5 seconds. Instant classic. Anyway, Hathcock's career as a sniper would soon go out with a bang. While riding in an armored transport vehicle, his platoon actually ran over an anti-tank mine. Hathcock managed to escape, pulling 7 fellow Marines out of the fire with him. Thanks to that good old pump and adrenaline, Hathcock had no idea that he was suffering severe burns and was finally pulled away by someone else. He ultimately suffered burns to his face, arms, and legs. Day in and day out, he was in constant pain. But that didn't stop him from helping establish the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. There, he dedicated nearly all of his time teaching new and upcoming snipers. Over the years, Hathcock's health declined and he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the disease that would ultimately take his life in 1999 at the age of 56.
Evil queens and their evil schemes.
Well, that's a stretch.
When you come across big bad figures in history, you might wonder if their infamous traits get passed on to their children. In the case of Mary Tudor, daughter of certified neckbeard King Henry VIII, the apple didn't fall far from the royal tree, but not for the reasons you may expect. Little Mary was born in 1516 and was actually the 5th child of King Henry and Queen Catherine of Aragon, but the only one to survive past infancy because babies are fragile.
Henry loved his daughter and provided her with a healthy education in music and language with a strong Catholic upbringing. But the problem with his daughter was that she wasn't a son, so she wasn't seen as a suitable heir to the throne of England. Mary, what do you want to be when you grow up? Queen of all England. No. With that being the case, Henry VIII sought to sow more seeds and give the law of large numbers another go. After all, he needs a baby boy to slam on the throne and bear the crown. To do that, he sought to divorce the now barren Catherine for a wife that was a bit more fruitful. Henry then lumbered down to present his case to the manager of the Catholic Church, the Pope.
No way, Henry. Them's against the rules,
said the Pope, but Henry argued,
I'm the king. I'm the one with
absolute power,
and annulled the marriage anyway. That little act of defiance was a precursor to the English Reformation, which toned down the Pope's authority within the Catholic Church. Instead, Henry made his own church, the Church of England, and put himself in charge, and he was all, nice. He then got himself a brand new womb on legs, Anne Boleyn, who blessed them with a daughter in 1533. Great, another one. When he divorced Catherine and started slop-flopping with Anne, Henry illegitimized Mary's claim to the throne and stripped her of her royal titles. From that day forward, a seed of resentment and hatred within Mary took root that would continue to grow for years to come. Eventually, Henry got his heir. Little Edward VI spawned into the world in October 1537, but had connection issues and lagged out in 1553 at the age of 15, a short 6 years after Daddy Henry himself expired. Blech. With no other heirs, there was really only one person who could take the throne, Lady Jane Grey, King Henry VIII's great niece. But Mary was royally ticked off, being all... After gathering a gaggle of supporters, Mary had Lady Jane's 16-year-old dome lobbed off and took the throne. Now in power, Mary's main goal was to re-establish Catholicism as the one true religion within England, since evil Papa Henry played a part in the Protestant Reformation, which diminished Catholic support. To help with that, she went and married Catholic fanatic Philip II of Spain, which was in the middle of the highly unexpected Spanish Inquisition at the time. She also reinstated heresy laws and began her purge of heretics within England. Basically, if you weren't or didn't want to be Catholic, then you could just get out. But Protestants protested her authority. No, it's just one word. Oh, that makes much more sense. With some light pushing and heavy shoving from her new husband, Mary decided to fight fire, with actual fire, by burning people. From 1555 to 1558, Mary had almost 300 people burned at the stake for heresy, truly believing that it was the only way to cleanse England of blasphemous false religions. To her, it was a God-given mission to rid the world of these heretics, and the people of England would realize in time that it was for the greater good. But the only thing that they realized was that she was a few sandwiches short of a picnic. Her scorched earth approach tanked her political approval rating and tarnished the image of Catholicism. She ultimately got down with the sickness in 1558 at the age of 42. Because of her violent antics, Queen Mary I of England is forever remembered in history as Bloody Mary, which is also a pretty disgusting drink. If you want your shot at claiming a throne, you're gonna have to start cracking skulls. Which is what Empress Wu Zetian would eventually do. Empress Wu officially ruled over the Second Zhou dynasty in China from the year 690 to 705. She was known for having extremely high intelligence, strong political competence, and superior ambition. But history overshadowed her strengths with a reputation as one of the cruelest rulers in China's history. Though of course it has to be said that many of the individuals who wrote about her actions weren't exactly huge fans of being politically cucked by a woman. So perhaps some of the stories of her evil deeds are a bit exaggerated? Maybe. But maybe not. Born into a wealthy family with a loving and supportive father, Wu was granted a first-rate education in writing, politics, and music, a privilege not afforded to most women. In her spare time, she favored heavy reading in politics and boring government stuff, which made her more than capable of holding a position in political power, if she was a guy. But opportunity would soon come a-knockin'.
Let me in.
At just 14 years old, tales of Wu's intelligence and beauty made it to the imperial palace, and she was formally summoned to become an imperial concubine under Emperor Taizong. This basically meant that she was now one of the emperor's glorified slam pieces, but Wu knew that she was destined for greater things. Every journey starts with the first step, after all. The main duty of a concubine was to convert these into these,
But Wu never did that. Instead, she would often find ways to openly discuss political affairs with the emperor, something that was certainly frowned upon for someone in her position. The emperor eventually went forever sleepy-bye, and his heir, Gaozhong, took the throne. As a side note, when an emperor died, any assigned concubines that produced no children were sent to become Buddhist priestesses, which is what happened to Wu. But Gaozhong summoned Wu back to the palace. This led to the belief that the two had a history of doing a little woohoo. Who? Wu. Not you. Now in the proud position of top-ranking concubine, it was time to climb higher. Her target? The Empress herself. Gaozhong's primary wife, Empress Wang, was a bit barren in the bush, and thus wasn't so good at the baby making. So, Wu showed her a neat party trick and shot out 4 boys and a daughter, an act that gained strong favor with the emperor. Even Empress Wang herself adored the children, especially the newborn daughter. Oh, how cute is she? I know, right?
You killed my daughter.
Yeah, Wu allegedly demolished her own infant daughter and blamed it on the Empress, even going an extra step and accusing the Empress and her mother of evil spooky witchcraft. And you know what? Gaozhong believed it. So Wang is demoted, and Wu is made Empress, and immediately has Wang whacked for good measure. But this wasn't a normal execution. According to some sources, Wu had the ex-empress's limbs cut off and her remains placed in a vat of wine.
And here, sir, is our house specialty.
I can already tell that this is gonna have a nice body to it. Gaozhong continued his rule for several years, but historians believe that Wu was pulling most of the strings, strengthening ally relations and executing or banishing political rivals behind the scenes. While Gaozhong then kicked the bucket in 683. With plenty of eligible sons, surely a new emperor was around the corner. Except, no. Apparently, there are allegations that Wu had banished many of the princes and even had the crown prince poisoned. While she did have 2 sons serve as emperors, she remained the puppet master, just like with Gaozhong. But in 690, sole power was given to Wu, and she was now the Empress Regent, holy and divine ruler of all China. Now in power, the only way anyone could take it from her would be from her cold, dead, wrinkly hands. Across the years, many rebels and rivals took that challenge, lashing out in attempts to usurp her throne, but none were successful. She even exiled one of her own sons after his wife spoke out against her. Any and all rebels were quickly eradicated. Despite her aggressive and manipulative climb to power, Empress Wu actually ruled very peacefully. She strengthened many relationships with allies, progressed gender equality, and eased taxes on peasants, allowing agriculture to flourish. Because of her constant vigilance against enemies, China experienced very few military engagements during her reign. So yeah, since she had a pretty good run as Empress, it wouldn't surprise me if tales of her wrongdoings weren't completely fabricated or at least overly exaggerated as a way to sway public opinion. The Empress fell ill in 705 and was forced to give up the throne to her son. She died shortly after. When discussing violent history, Madagascar may not be the first thing that comes to mind. But this forgotten stepchild of an African island known for vanilla and bad movies was once home to the Kingdom of Imarina and the Marina people. In the 1800s, the throne was occupied by Queen Ranavalona I, sometimes referred to as Ranavalona the Cruel. A name like that is often earned, like Barry the Bashful or Dave the Dickless. With her reign saturated in the blood of her own subjects as well as foreigners, it's easy to understand why she earned her reputation as a merciless and brutal monarch. It all started way back with humble beginnings. Little Rana was actually born a poor peasant girl with an equally poor peasant family. As such, she had a bleak future just chock full of peasant things ahead of her. God, they were poor. But fate had other plans in store. Rana's destitute dad had casually stumbled upon a plot to assassinate the king at the time, and quickly warned him of the impending doom. After narrowly avoiding a classic comedy death, the grateful king demonstrated his gratitude by adopting Rana into the royal family and marrying her off to the prince. Now, Rana is royalty. Sweet deal, cause it could have just as easily been like, "Your Majesty, I just found these plans to have you assassinated."
Good work, little peasant man. I would pat you on the head, but you're just too dirty. Also, I have to kill you as a safety precaution. Oh. You'll understand.
Nice guy. Oh yeah, real nice guy. Fast forward a bit, the king eventually dies, Rana's hubby Prince becomes king, he dies, and then in 1828, the now 50-year-old Rana seizes the palace for herself, murdering any and all royal family members so that no one can even think of contesting her newfound power. Sure, she's powerful and all, but can she make your subscribe button glow? I didn't think so. You should click it. One of her first orders as Supreme Mega Ultra Ruler was to establish Madagascar as a self-sufficient nation. In doing so, she told everyone else to go kick rocks, pound sand, and touch grass, because Madagascar is a strong independent nation who don't need no foreigners. Oh yeah, she kicked out all of the foreigners too. Go on. To fully eliminate all outside influence, she had any colonials stripped of their titles, completely nullified all treaties with smelly Europeans, mainly the French, and straight up banned Christianity. Sorry, Jesus. Keep hanging in there, buddy. Queen Ranavalona sent Madagascar back into the Dark Ages, and good old tradition was back on the menu. Even the justice system was completely uprooted. Forget your run-of-the-mill witnesses, evidence, and testimony. That's boring. Instead, we have this. The trial by ordeal. Simply chug a frothy cup of poison seasoned with goopy chicken skin. If you throw up, you're innocent. So the French were all sacre bleu about Madagascar's isolationism, because they kinda wanted to grab a piece of that landmass. So they tried to do just that, but the queen was all, no, don't touch, and kept fighting off the invaders. In 1835, the French made a really big push to take the island, but they were swiftly defeated and had to escargot the heck back to Europe. But to really drive home the idea that Madagascar was off limits, Queen Rana had the heads of French soldiers placed on pikes and littered around the beaches. This caused any would-be invaders to think twice lest they be converted into a pretty cool Halloween decoration. With outside influence now null and void, it was time to focus inward. The people of Madagascar were taught the importance of self-sufficiency. As such, they would only produce what they needed to survive and prosper. So they made guns, and bullets, and alcohol. Hell yeah. Infrastructure and factories were built using mandatory labor. This was a kind of tax that citizens paid through sweat and tears. After all, them things ain't gonna build themselves. As for the Christians on the island, they were executed, either by being hucked off ledges, burned, or by using a colorful method of progressive amputation. Not a good time or place to be a Christian. Many citizens were outraged at what the kingdom was turning into and attempted to remove Rana from the throne. Keyword being attempted. With all of this violence and lower quality of life, not to mention various diseases, the population took a nosedive. Some sources claim that between 1833 and 1839, Madagascar's population of 5 million fellas was cut down to just 2.5 million. Not a good stat to tack onto your legacy. Rana reigned for 33 years before honking her last shoe in her bed in 1861. To her credit, she did keep colonial rule at bay while building up her own kingdom. She just, killed half of her country. Yes, I know Elizabeth Bathory wasn't a queen. She was a countess, but her story more than makes up for it. So, as I said, Elizabeth Bathory was a countess in 16th century Hungary with quite the dark side to her. She is arguably one of the most prolific serial killers in all of known history. Horrific to many, wifey material to some. Now, I'll acknowledge that some scholars believe these accusations to be completely fabricated and merely a smear campaign against her image, but we like to have fun here. So, little Lizzie was born into a rich and powerful family and forcibly engaged this geometric anomaly of a human, Count Ferenc Nadasdy, at just 11 years old. Don't worry, he was 16. This move was one concocted by both of their families as a way to combine each other's wealth and influence, and it worked. However, being all rich and powerful meant that you didn't really have much to do but sit around and be rich. So sometimes you gotta numb that perpetual emptiness with a little bit of purpose. When we fast forward to 1602, rumors began to circulate amongst the Hungarian population about the Countess's brand new hobby, murdering children. You see, Elizabeth Bathory was accused of torturing and killing hundreds of innocent, wide-eyed, rosy-cheeked girls with the help of her 4 servants. But why, you ask? Some believe that she harvested the young girl's blood for eternal youth, bathing in it as a nightly ritual, like some kind of Hollywood elite. But there is zero solid evidence even remotely hinting that she ever really did this. In fact, those rumors didn't circulate until 100 years after her death. Others believe that she just liked doing it for the thrill of it, which is much more plausible. Messed up, but plausible. Her early victims were mainly adolescent peasant girls. With the help of her 4 servants, whose names look like they belong in an NHL hockey team, Elizabeth carried out the gruesome murders. I mean, these were nasty, so here's your warning. Victims were commonly beaten to death to the point of their bodies bursting open, with one particular victim struck over 500 times. Others were reportedly pricked with needles and stabbed all over their bodies. In the winter, some girls were dunked in a nearby creek on cold, chilly nights and left to freeze. In the summer, others were covered in honey and left to be a feast for the flies. Elizabeth herself enjoyed putting red-hot metal rods on or in her victims. In 1609, Elizabeth opened up a boarding school for young girls of noble birth. Dozens of girls entered this school, but none were ever seen again. And this was the tipping point. You see, no one really bats an eye when peasants disappear, but when it's rich girls? No. That changes things. And now more people got involved, all the way up to the Hungarian king, who ordered a formal investigation. After a year of gathering hundreds of potential witnesses who claimed to have seen Elizabeth and the gang disposing of corpses, they were all properly arrested in 1610. Afterward, the accomplices testified separately, providing known body counts and horrific details of the deeds, even cross-confirming each other's stories. Because of this, historians believe that their testimonies are true recollections of the horror. Elizabeth is often pinned with the body count of over 600 victims. But that's just crazy. In reality, historians believe the real number to be much lower, probably only around 300. Oh, that's still a lot. All 5 were tried and convicted, with only 3 of the 4 accomplices being executed. Elizabeth avoided the death penalty, but was ultimately imprisoned within her very own dungeon, with limited contact to others for the rest of her life. A life that lasted only 4 more years. Painful ancient medicine. Hundreds and even thousands of years ago, humanity's knowledge of itself was still in its infancy. We had a basic idea of what makes us tick, but that wasn't enough to stop the scientifically curious from fiddling around both outside and inside people's bodies. Alright, just gonna poke around in here and what's the matter, doctor? There's a scary skeleton in you! That being the case, it was up to these early pioneers of medicine to provide solutions to human ailments, be it a simple cough or a giant debilitating pulsating tumor. If you were lucky, you'd find a doctor willing to test out different medicines outside of thoughts and prayers. But some of these treatments would have you begging for mercy from whatever divine being you may have believed in. Take for instance, someone afflicted with hemorrhoids. Yeah, that's how this is starting off. Nowadays, you just go to the corner store, prepare yourself an H, finger your B, and sit at home in complete discomfort. A few days later, you're right as rain. But back in the past, humans did not have such a luxury. Failed treatment could result in some gnarly infections, which, in non-modern times, was a death sentence. Sure, you could go to an apothecary who could whip up a strange mixture of grimy herbs and unidentifiable animal liquids that you could sip on, but that's most likely going to cause intense gastrointestinal distress. You need something that's tried and true. Well, you can iron out that wrinkle near your wrinkle with this, a hot iron rod. The theory's simple. Hemorrhoids are basically small open wounds, so a little bit of cauterization would close them bad boys right up and allow them to heal. This method was actually first used in the 4th century BC by father of medicine, Hippocrates. He apparently was a huge fan of cauterization as a last resort cure-all for most afflictions. Have a bad cough? Sear your throat to a medium rare. Have a headache? A burning rod to the temples will make you forget all about it. Hippocrates was of firm belief that if a condition couldn't be cured with medicine, it could be cured with a knife. If it couldn't be cured with a knife, it could be cured with fire. If it couldn't be cured with fire, well, then you're just shit out of luck. The obvious problem with this cure in the rectal region is that it isn't without collateral damage. The application often led skin fusing to the burning rod and getting ripped from the body. Another unfortunate possibility was that the rod was hot enough to burn your skin, but not hot enough to cauterize the hemorrhoids, so you'd only get an appetizer instead of the full meal. You were also under threat of having the target missed completely. One slip, trip, loss of grip, and your back lip's getting a rip. It is reported that patients would claim the rectal remedy was successful, but then again, would you agree to a follow-up treatment if you weren't cured? Probably not. We move on from being a pain in the ass to being a pain in the dick. Metallic catheters have been around for thousands of years, dating all the way back to around 3000 BC. These little guys were used to relieve patients of urinary obstructions which didn't allow for proper passage of pee. Ever lie in bed at night needing to go, but you're too comfy, so you just lie there feeling the pressure building in your bladder? Ever have to hold it in on a long car ride home where you're twitching and groaning, yearning for that sweet urethral flow? Well, then you've experienced a fraction of the pain generated from being physically unable to drain your piss pouch. This was such a prevalent problem throughout history that it was on the high priority list of the super science people of yore. Evidence of early versions of these tools have been found throughout ancient Egypt, Rome, Greece, China, and India, with materials being used ranging from onion stalks to solid gold. The theory was simple. Like a clogged drain, you just gotta poke around in there to clear the blockage. Enter the catheter, which enters you. After snaking around your tract, the tube enters your bladder and provides a cleared path for you to relieve yourself. As will be a common theme throughout this video, ancient times had only rudimentary methods for sedatives such as opiates, herbs, and alcohol to subdue any pain. If these weren't available, you could always bite down on a stick or something while getting a metal tube shoved up your nethers. The insertion procedure was delicate and tricky. Since these tools were handmade, edges could be rough. Without proper care, your internals could get all kinds of tore up, which would certainly have no way of being treated effectively. If improperly cleaned, a catheter could leave behind debris in your bladder, causing infection or even worse, future blockages. So with that, only a properly prepared person performed the painful pubic procedure. As technology evolved, however, catheters became flexible and more ergonomic for both male and female patients, with various shapes and sizes to increase comfort, or rather decrease discomfort. But back in those times, a few minutes of sharp pain was well worth the relief of long-term agony and potential kidney failure. Let's just say that without a catheter, you're in for a bad time. Speaking of having a bad time, this would be one of them. As a follow-up to metallic catheters, if the obstruction was a calcified stone too large to pass naturally, surgical intervention may have been in the stars for you. The first recorded practice of lithotomy dates back to ancient Greeks. The word lithotomy derives from the Greek language, with lithos meaning stone and tomos meaning cut. This makes sense as surgeons were quite literally cutting for a stone stuck in your belly. To say that the procedure was not pretty would be a drastic understatement. Nowadays, lithotomy is performed by making a small incision in the abdomen and using a small camera tool to fish around for the offending mass. Back in the day, however, this was a perineal procedure. Your perineum, if you're unaware, is that no man's land between your anus and your junk. Modern scholars refer to it as the taint or the grundle. That's the incision site. It's gonna suck. Lying on your back with your knees pulled to your chest to give the doctor a front row seat to your particulars, a surgeon would make the invasive entry and beeline it for your bladder to attempt removal of the stone, if he could find it. Physical removal was either performed with a hooking tool or with the surgeon's fingers, like he was trying to get the last chip out of a Pringles can. If you were lucky, the stone or stones produced in your body were relatively small in diameter, maybe a quarter inch or less than a centimeter. But as you can imagine, problems arose if these stones were large. Excessive bleeding and internal damage can occur from bladder stones exceeding 1.5 inches or about 4 centimeters, though luckily these were rare. It's no surprise that these surgical procedures were excruciatingly painful. It was almost required that an assistant or two would be present to restrain you during the procedure to avoid any unnecessary damage from involuntary struggling as you endured the pain. After extraction, the patient was sat in a shallow pool of vinegar and salt to halt any bleeding before being stitched up like a teddy bear. There's no question that the procedure sucked, but the long-term benefits outweighed the short-term investment. Capital gains, more like capital pains. Now, I did briefly cover trepanation way back when I thought doing a monotone narration was a good idea, but let's revisit it. So, trepanation is the act of deliberately drilling a hole in one's head for the sake of some kind of medical relief. This could be physical pain like excessive skull pressure or headaches, or for spiritual reasons, as some early societies believed that trepanation allowed for the release of spooky spirits haunting your melon. Trepanation is one of the earliest known surgical procedures performed throughout human history, with evidence being found across the entire globe as far back as the Neolithic era, the end of the Stone Age. So imagine you want to get some relief for your frequent pounding headaches, and your local medicine man whips out his iconic and sharp obsidian slab. Dr. Ooga Booga gives you a smile as he starts carving away at your dome, peeling skin from skull. You'd think that fight or flight mode would kick in, but Next came the actual carving of bone, either by making rectangular intersecting cuts to eventually pop out a square of your skull, or by slowly whittling away at it until reaching your soft, chewy brain like it was a dang Tootsie Pop. There are a few known trepanation methods observed across the world. The first two I just described, rectangular cuts and scraping.
The third was the use of a tree fine, a hollow-toothed cylinder.
This is like popping into your local Home Depot for a Craftsman V20 brushless drill and 2-inch bimetal hole saw set. Is this gonna hurt? Only if you scream. The last and most commonly used method was the drilling of closely spaced holes, usually performed with a bow and flint. Now, having your head carved into is certainly not a pleasurable experience, so you'd probably want the procedure to be over quickly. Well, think again. Since it was known that jamming a sharp object into the brain would almost certainly diminish the surgeon's success rate, trepanation was a long, delicate, and grueling process. Trepanation is still practiced in modern medicine as a craniectomy to treat brain injuries and remove brain tumors. Surprisingly though, the majority of recovered remains showing evidence of trepanation also showed signs of continued bone growth and healing, indicating that these subjects survived their surgeries. It's estimated that around 80% of those who got their noggin knocked ended up living, though it's questionable if they lived well. Imagine spending months or even years training as a warrior, perfecting the art of handling a blade, mastering close combat, and being the embodiment of peak physical strength, only to be taken out by an arrow the moment you step out onto the battlefield. Huge bummer, but all's fair in love and war, and boy, did you love war until about 5 seconds ago. Now lying on the ground, your life slowly slipping away from a simple arm wound, you look up to see a friendly face. It's one of them fancy new soldiers. What do they call them? Oh yeah, medics. His whole job is to make you feel better and to get you back up on your feet. Your other buddies on the battlefield? They can wait a bit. They're not going anywhere. Now, unfortunately for you, the arrow's pretty deep, so things aren't looking too great. Shallow entry wounds you could simply rip out, rub some dirt in it, and call it a day. These deeper wounds, however, they need a bit more persuasion. Most arrowhead designs at the time are barbed. Where they land, they're meant to stay. So here are your options. Option 1. If there's already an exit wound, snap the arrow in two and push it through to the other side. Sorry if you're eating while watching this. Option 2. If there's no exit wound, you're gonna need to pull the arrowhead out. Simply open the entry wound enough to find the arrowhead and gently pull, avoiding the barbs ripping at your delicate insides. Option 3. If the arrowhead is stuck in a bone or too deep to retrieve... Option 4. If you can retrieve the arrow and you want things to be quick like a band-aid, use the classic tooth fairy method. Simply tie the protruding arrow to another arrow and fire away. The offending arrow is ripped out and you're left there in complete and utter agony. Now we just have to dump some honey on that bad boy, wrap it up nice and neat in a filthy cloth covered in mud and dirt, and you'll be back to it in no time.
The fuck?
No, this isn't just chilling out in the living room. This has to do with ancient eye surgery, which honestly makes my toes curl because I hate anything that has to do with eyes. My wife, she constantly tortures me by poking her own eyeball for fun just because she can, and it honestly just heebies my jeebies, so here we go. Couching is the first known surgical procedure to counteract a cataract. What's a cataract? It's the clouding of the natural lens inside of your eyeball. If you know anything about light scattering, you'll know that semi-transparency does a lot of it. Makes your vision go all wonky like you're looking at the world through a steamy shower door, except permanently and much less sexy. Well, not permanently anymore, because them ancient Egyptians found a great way to stab your own eyes and get rid of the problem. However, it would be much, much later until we got something recorded in fine detail. Around the 6th century BC, ancient Indian physician Sushruta wrote about his breakthrough cataract removal process called couching in his medical texts. Hey, look at this guy. You're telling me you wouldn't put your life in the hands of ancient Indian Santa Claus? Come on. The theory behind couching is what you'd expect. Take a cloudy lens and push it out of the way. This was done with a curved needle to delicately puncture the eye and dislodge the cloudy lens. This was likely very painful, as you're literally ripping out your eye's lens from its natural position. The cataract would either be pushed aside out of the vision pathway or pressed out of the eyeball. Now, to his credit, Sushruta was very mindful of the need to have clean tools and a clean environment for surgeries. He was centuries ahead of European medicine in that regard, but his sterilization techniques weren't perfect. Patients often experienced agonizing infections which inevitably led to the complete loss of vision in the affected eye. It is estimated that roughly 70% of patients were left completely blind due to surgical complications. But hey, if you're gonna go blind anyway, why not take the 30% chance and risk it for the biscuit? Ah, the iconic bloodletting, the basic bitch of ancient medicine. Despite being outright stupid, this practice was used throughout numerous cultures across human history, beginning as early as the ancient Egyptians around 3000 BC, but spreading as far as ancient Rome, Greece, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Mesoamerica, and Africa. Pretty much everywhere. The prevailing theory was that most ailments were the result of having an imbalance of the four humors in the body. If you're unaware, the four humors theory was developed by none other than our bearded boy, Hippocrates. It states that our bodies consist of four bodily fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. A perfectly normal and healthy person was believed to have these four fluids in perfect balance. Any tip to one extremity can lead to disease and a shift in personality. Having a bad cough? You've got too much phlegm in your system. Cough it up. Got some terrible tummy issues? You got too much yellow bile. Time to touch your uvula. Almost anything else? Well, you've got too much bad quality blood in you, so let's slice open an artery and purge you of your impurities. Now, typically, blood was drained until the patient passed out, which is horrible, stupid, and dumb. Yes, your body constantly produces new blood, but it's also a self-sustaining cycle of breaking down the old and producing new. There's no need to drain the pool. An incision would be made around the inside of your elbow, and your heart would do the rest, pumping out your life force and making you weaker by the second. To no surprise, incisions would often lead to infection, and with less blood in your system and thus less white blood cells to fight off said infection, whatever initial ailment you may have had now pales in comparison to the new pickle you've put yourself in. There's not much humor in that, is there?
So I decided to be a little silly with this chapter. Enjoy this cringe. Oh, oops.
In today's times, you can count yourself blessed, cause modern dentistry is the best that it gets. But step into the past, that pain gets intense. No Novocaine blast, no numbing defense. Impactions, extractions, gonna ruin your day. This dental interaction to rid you of decay. Looking for pliers? Now try a bronze hook. Yanking at your teeth without a second look. Hold still, time to draw you shady surgeon, please. But you can't even hear him through your shrieks and screams. Sharpened stone to the bone, now you're all alone. As you groan and you moan on this painful throne. Need relief? Try this. Here, give that a taste. Don't feel a difference, cause it's dead mouse paste. Have some opium to try to dull the throb. Well, now you're just high and you're still gonna sob. So sit in that chair, chewing on your herbs, cause you're gonna feel despair when he strikes that nerve. The gravity of cavities is taking its toll, but it's agony, insanity surging through your soul. Pull it out, that tooth is gone. You scream and you shout in your perpetual yawn. All done now, you're good for a bit. Just chug the sheep wine, okay, now spit. That shit sucked, but at least you're alive, so you can even leave a like or hit that subscribe.
The most painful punishments from around the world. Well, of course the Spaniards are going to be on this list. Them suckers tortured half-truths out of people for over 350 years during the highly unexpected Spanish Inquisition between 1478 up until 1834. Now, when you're performing painful public persecutions for such a long time, you're going to come up with pretty colorful ways to do it. Ways to inflict maximum pain to ensure that you extract those dubious confessions from those filthy non-Catholic heathens. So it's no wonder that history was blessed with devilish devices designed to do just that. You had the Spanish spider, the Spanish collar, the Spanish tickler, very different from the French variety, the Spanish donkey, and the star of this segment, the Spanish boot. Originating somewhere during the Inquisition times, the Spanish boot was a very basic, yet very effective interrogation tool.
Help.
4 planks of wood and a few bits of metal. You got your braces for holding the wooden splints and sharpened metal nails to make you squint. The legs of the victim would be secured in place between the 2 inner free-moving braces. The 2 outer planks are secured to each other, preventing any outward movement. Not that you would want to, cause, you know, sharp nails and such. Once the victim was sat down, a large wooden wedge would be placed in between the inner planks, locking the victim's legs. And I'm sure your imagination is a few steps ahead here. The interrogator equips his iconic giant hammer and rears back, preparing to strike. Are you sure you don't want to confess your crimes? Cause this pulsating sack of meat is about to treat you like one of them carnival tests of strength. With one swift blow from the hammer, the wedge drives the inner boards outwards, lacerating your legs, shattering your shins, and crushing your calves. The pain is pure agony. And that was only the first strike. Additional slams from the mallet reduce your legs down to something resembling burger meat. Remember when you could walk like 30 seconds ago? Yeah, me too. Now, despite the Iberian identity, there were many variations of the Spanish boot throughout history. The Scottish first dabbled in boot torture even before the Spanish, tightly binding victims' legs in saturated leather. The bindings would then be heated over an open fire, shrinking the leather and constricting the legs to the point of snapping bone. The French even got in on the action with their own version. The victim would be bound and gagged on a wooden chair with both feet placed in a single oversized iron boot. It would then be filled with either boiling water, boiling oil, or even molten lead. And if you're unaware, pure lead melts at around 622 degrees Fahrenheit or 328 degrees Celsius. For comparison, just 2 seconds of exposure to 150 degree Fahrenheit water is enough to cause third-degree burns on human skin. Victims of the French boot would have their skin and their muscles boiled off of their bones or encased in a big hunk of lead. Better get to confessing, or at least make up something convincing. Oh, this shit sucks. You ever hear the term an eye for an eye? Well, the literal form of this would be the toe-curling, face-scrunching practice of abacination. Popular amongst ancient Greeks, Persians, and within the Byzantine Empire, abacination is a form of corporal punishment, meaning that the goal isn't death, but rather to teach the victim a lesson. In this case, how not to see anymore. That's because abacination is the act of inflicting intentional or oftentimes irreversible damage to one's eyeballs. Hey. What the fuck? Your bulbous oculi have a myriad of nerves ready to send your brain big ouch signals the moment they detect discomfort. And boy, are they about to feel some discomfort. Although it was mainly used as a punishment for heresy or treason, the act of annihilating one's eyes existed all across human history. Perhaps one of the most popular examples of this was executed by Byzantine Emperor Basil II. After defeating the Bulgarians at the Battle of Cladion, Big Bad Basil had taken thousands of enemy soldiers hostage. He had ordered that the men be divided into groups of 100 and brought before him. It was then he had his men gouge out the eyes of 99 of the soldiers, sparing one who would be allowed to keep one eye. That lucky duck would be the one to lead his now blinded comrades back to their respective commanders. Now, according to legend, this mass blinding was conducted on 15,000 men, granting Basil II the vicious title of Basil the Bulgar Slayer. But how would this blinding actually be performed? Well, it's really up to how the person doing it felt that day. Traditionally, abacination was carried out by jamming a red-hot iron rod into the ocular cavity, essentially melting the eye from the skull. Other flavors of removal included scooping with a spoon-like device, slitting with a blade, using preposterous pressure to pop them like pimples, or just leaving it up to good old chemistry. Now, if you really pissed someone off, you would be strapped to a chair while corrosive liquid, usually boiling vinegar, was placed in soluble cups and positioned over your eyes. The corrosive agents would slowly eat away at the bottom of the cups, left to drip into your eyeballs, which would painfully dissolve away. At that point, you'd be luckier to die than to survive. But couldn't they just close their eyelids? Oh, you mean these? Yeah, they cut those off too. Don't worry, it was only a little painful. See what I did there? No, you didn't. That's fine. Strap in for this one, cause that's exactly what's about to go down, and your legs are about to go up. This is the Tiger Bench, a Chinese torture device popularly used in China from the Imperial Age up through today. That's right, the International Society for Human Rights, a German-based non-governmental non-profit organization, claims that multiple inhumane torture devices like the Tiger Bench are still used on prisoners in China to this day for extracting confessions or flat-out torture just because. It's true, probably. And the same applied to its use in the Imperial Age. During the times of the Ming and Qing dynasties between the 14th and 20th centuries, the judicial system required a confession to legally convict a criminal for their crimes, since forensics at the time weren't all that great. Unless you had notable status to sway public opinion, the perpetrator would basically have to be caught red-handed by multiple witnesses. He ran into my knife. He ran into my knife 10 times. He had it coming. But what do Tiger Bench do, you ask in poor English? It's very simple. The victim is delicately slammed onto a wooden bench in a sitting position, their hands and ankles bound by ropes, and their mouths gagged with, I don't know, probably a piece of cloth or something. They would also have their torso and thighs secured to the bench to prevent any unwanted thrashing from the pain that they're about to experience. One by one, bricks or wooden slabs would be placed under the victim's piggies, slowly elevating them higher and higher while the rest of their body remained locked in place. Now, unless you have the Tibio Taylor talent of a turkey, you can see where this is going. With each addition of a brick, your ligaments in your knees become hyperextended, painfully forcing your knee joint beyond its natural range of motion. If any of you less than limber people remember the ungodly sit and reach box from your middle school gym classes, just imagine that, but someone grabbing your arms and pulling you with all of their might. Then you might just get a lick of what that pain must feel like. The continuous hyperextension eventually leads to the shattering of the kneecaps and the splintering of the leg bones, utterly destroying muscles and tendons, rendering the victim's legs completely useless. Trust me, although this guy seems untroubled, inside, he's screaming. And if that weren't enough, prisoners would be bound in this position for days on end, to the brink of starvation and full sleep deprivation from the ongoing pain. Not only from the hyperextension, but from physical beatings to the rest of their body if they continued to refuse to confess. They don't know I'm a double-jointed masochist. Despite what the chill demeanors on these fellas' faces express, getting sawn vertically in half is not a pleasant experience. Although the act of sawing has been present throughout many different cultures in history, ancient Roman and Chinese versions were mainly done transversely, or at the waist. But some sadistic buttholes thought, nah, not painful enough. Let's try a different axis. And you know what? Let's hang them upside down too. We'll start shredding the sack, split the crack, go down the hull, and to the skull. The method is pretty self-explanatory. A victim will be hoisted up upside down with arms and legs secured to two posts, usually with their dangly bits out. The condemned would then have a big ol' saw ripped through their bodies like a slice of birthday cake. On the bright side, the poor soul would most likely be long dead or at the very least unconscious before the saw ever got that far thanks to the excruciating pain and severe blood loss. Documented cases of this particular path of punishment are rare, but some stories have survived. The most known case being that of Simon the Zealot, one of the 12 apostles of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If you've ever seen Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, he's the less detailed guy all the way at the end of the table getting ridiculed by these two fine gents for asking, "When can we eat?" Very little is known about poor Simon at all, being only passively mentioned in the Bible. History states that he preached across Egypt and Persia, with the latter being the place of his demise. Apparently, the Persians weren't too happy with the door-to-door preachings of Simon, so much so that they saw to his end, literally. According to some historians, around the year 65 AD, at the age of 60, Simon was spread in two while spreading the word of the Lord. For his dedication to the J-Man, Simon was made a saint in the Catholic Church, with many depictions of him holding a long saw, similar to the one that ripped through his being. Ironically enough, he was also made the patron saint of tanners and sawyers, which really sucks. I mean, imagine the way you died being your eternal legacy. Like, oh damn guys, you hear that Peter got nailed by a 37 Nissan Altima last week? Better make him the patron saint of pedestrians. But hey, when you walk with Jesus, we're all jaywalkers. Oftentimes we find that nature is already well equipped with possible torture resources, and it doesn't even have to be something large or intimidating. Sometimes it's the small things that pack the biggest punch. Well, turns out that quite a few groups of people around the world took advantage of nature's blessings. Like this little guy. This is a Pseudomyrmex triplarinus, but you can call it a little ouch. This agonizing arthropod is a venomous species of ant most commonly found in the northern areas of South America. These ants contain a cytotoxic venom, which if you remember my little toxins rhyme from my worst jobs in history video, you'd know that cytotoxins cause extreme cellular damage and painful swelling, making it a perfect tool for devastating torture. For this section, we actually have a very modern use case. Back in 2014, a group of Bolivian villagers in the province of Ayopaya apprehended a pair of teenagers accused of stealing several motorcycles. Since the run-of-the-mill judicial penal system wasn't deemed effective enough, the villagers took matters into their own hands. The two upstanding criminals, aged 18 and 19, were strapped to a tree infested with venomous ants for 3 days. The young men writhed in pain for hours and hours on end, sustaining bites all over their bodies from head to toe. Chests were chomped, calves were crunched, nipples were nipped, and balls were bitten. It was only after being found by one of their sisters that the young men were freed from their pincer prison. Well, also after all of their relatives coughed up about $3,700 in cash as compensation for the bikes that were stolen. Gotta pay back your debt after all. Both men were rushed to intensive care, with one requiring dialysis to survive. But I bet they learned a valuable lesson. Don't take shit that doesn't belong to you. There have been other claims of ant torture throughout history, though, as a warning, these are more anecdotal than confirmed. It is said that the Apache people of the southern US and northern Mexico regions were capable of committing horrible acts of violence, but hey, when you're forced off your land, what are you gonna do? One such act was taking prisoners of war and burying them neck deep in the earth, allegedly near anthills containing red harvester ants. With a simple prod to the hill, thousands of ants pour out to defend their home, and being the nearest target, looks like you're the culprit. The red harvester ant latches onto your skin with its strong Chad-like mandibles and proceeds to repeatedly stab you with its stinger. Once stung, pheromones are released, chemically signaling other ants to swarm you. Your lips, your mouth, your ears, and even your eyes are all susceptible to the stings. The intense pain from just a single sting has been described as feeling like being prodded by a searing hot needle, lasting up to 8 hours. So it goes without saying that thousands of those would really suck. But don't worry, it's well documented that around 500 stings would be enough to kill a human. You're probably getting all itchy just thinking about them things crawling all over you, aren't you? Well, now you are. Our last stop on this journey takes place in the big old continent of Africa. Having dealt with colonization for centuries, the many countries of Africa are no stranger to pain. In fact, they're pretty good at dishing it out, especially to each other. Now, the concept of trial by ordeal is not exclusive to Africa. It's been seen across Europe, Persia, India, and Cambodia as well, but this segment focuses on Africa. Why? Because that's how I wrote the script and that's how I'm editing this video, so... Okay, so the idea behind the trial by ordeal is to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused through various means of torture. If you survive, you're innocent. If you die, you're guilty. Not that it mattered anymore, but there were many different ordeals to be trialed through. These are gonna be a bit rapid fire, so stick with me. And speaking of which, the first one is the trial by fire. The accused would either be forced to walk along a length of hot coals, hold scalding hot metal, or retrieve items from cauldrons of boiling hot oil. If the victim showed no visible signs of injury, they would be considered innocent. But that's just setting people up for failure. These examples of trial by fire have been historically documented across Togo, Nigeria, and Sudan. Next was the self-explanatory trial by poison. The accused would drink toxic concoctions consisting of various local poisons. In Liberia and Ghana, victims enduring the trial would be forced to ingest the bark of the sassywood tree. Alright, which one of you drank all the sassywood juice? No, I don't want to drink that stuff. Nope. Was it you? The bark of the sassywood tree contains erythrofleine, a powerful poison that can fuck up your heart. But as long as you regurgitate that slop out of your system, you're right as rain, and considered innocent. Similarly, some prisoners in Sierra Leone or Nigeria would drink a solution made from the calabar bean which contains physostigmine, an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. If you've never seen my chemical weapons video, this is just a fancy way of saying that it causes life-threatening seizures and a loss of your respiratory control, causing you to choke to death. One final trial would be the trial by water. Popular in pre-colonial Côte d'Ivoire, the accused would have their hands and feet bound and be tossed in the local river. Those who were able to break free of their bindings and swim to the surface were absolved of their crimes, while those who sank like stones were doomed to figuratively and literally drown in their guilt. Talk about washing away your sins.
It's near the end of 1938, and deep in the confines of Berlin, Germany, a couple of nerds are about to discover a discovery that will change the world forever. Chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann were enjoying the traditional German pastime of bombarding uranium with neutrons in hope of something interesting to happen. After a few sauerkraut sandwiches, Hahn and Strassmann checked the results of their experiments and discovered that they had performed nuclear fission, which is the act of splitting a larger atom into smaller atoms, releasing a ton of energy in the process. Kind of like a bomb. But there's a bit of a problem. You see, this isn't just Germany, this is 1939 Germany. You know, Nazi Germany. And nuclear fission sounds like it would make a pretty effective weapon. German-American physicist and local Nazi hater Leo Szilard was worried Strassman and Hahn's discovery would fall into the wrong hands, so he knew he needed to warn the Allied nations. So he wrote a letter to United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt that basically said, the letter was even signed by famous scientist Albert Einstein, so that Roosevelt knew to take it very seriously, which he did. With some prodding from British scientists, Roosevelt approved a program on October 9th, 1941 to assess the feasibility of an atomic bomb using uranium. So sometime later, the committee of the program came back to FDR and said, "We might be able to do it, but we need like $50 to $100 million maybe?" Roosevelt scratched his chin and contemplated moving forward, but was ultimately convinced when a bunch of very American boats were blown up by very Japanese planes. On August 13th, 1942, theory would be engineered into reality with the start of the Manhattan Project, which pushed forward the physical development of the world's first nuclear weapons. Such an ambitious project certainly needed an equally ambitious leader, and there was only one man for the job. That's right, the Manhattan Project was under the direction of none other than Leslie Groves Jr., a decorated and well-respected United States Army Corps of Engineers lieutenant general, but he also needed someone to lead the secret weapons laboratory. So here enters the star of our story, theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, a strictly conservative, Nobel Prize-winning scientific leader. Except he wasn't. To the United States government, Oppenheimer was a filthy commie sympathizer. He had never won any notable awards, nor had he led any major scientific breakthrough projects. But like a shonen anime main character, he had drive and ambition like no other, and Lieutenant General Groves knew that determination would guarantee the success of this project, so Oppenheimer got the job. Great, but now they had to actually build the lab, and what's more remote and secure for a secret base than in the middle of fuckbuck nowhere, New Mexico? Now set with a location, Oppenheimer then assembled his own Avenger squad of some of the most brilliant physicists at the time in the spring of 1943, placing himself as the Captain America of the group. To keep everyone living together harmoniously during the project, the town of Los Alamos was erected practically overnight. Now, the race was on to beat the smelly Nazis to the finish. With such a high-pressure project, it wasn't uncommon for everyone on staff to frequently worry that Germany was going to beat them to the punch. But Oppenheimer was a natural leader. He was constantly present in every meeting, discussion, and critical moment during the project, ensuring that morale was always maxed out. By July 1945, 3 bombs were successfully developed. Little Boy, a gun-type fission bomb that worked by firing one chunk of uranium into another, Fat Man, an implosion-type bomb that worked by compressing a plutonium core to critical mass, and Gadget, a Fat Man duplicate used as an initial test run. And boy was it a test. An official test site, codenamed Trinity, had been constructed 200 miles away from Los Alamos to serve as ground zero for the world's first detonation of a nuclear weapon. On July 16, 1945, Gadget was positioned up a 100-foot tall tower to be detonated. Bunkered a hop, skip, jumping away from the tower were 425 spectators, including Oppenheimer. While excited, everyone was still pretty freaking nervous. The scientists weren't exactly certain of what would happen once the bomb was detonated. Would it explode as planned? Would it fizzle out and do nothing? Or would it cause a chain reaction that would obliterate the Earth's atmosphere and allow the sun to burn humanity to a crisp? There was only one way to find out. At 5:29 a.m., Gadget was detonated and immediately exploded with the force of 25,000 tons of TNT. Almost instantly, the explosion turned the desert sand into a 1,000-foot wide glass crater, generated a shockwave that was felt over 100 miles away, and created a mushroom cloud that stretched 7.5 miles into the sky. He had done it. Oppenheimer and his team successfully created a nuclear weapon, an achievement equally exciting and horrifying. If you're familiar with historical timelines, you might realize that by July of 1945, Nazi Germany had already surrendered, with Japan being the last man standing.
Once news of the successful nuclear test reached President Bro Harry Truman, he quickly used it as an open threat to Japan. On July 26, 1945, the US, Great Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration, a document calling for the immediate and unconditional surrender of the Empire of Japan, lest they face prompt and utter destruction. Japan, of course, responded rather quickly, saying, so the US was all,
You sure about that? You sure about that?
and proceeded to deliver on the threat. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, Japan, a major port and military headquarters. Because it was largely untouched by bombing raids, it allowed for a clear measurement of the before and after destruction of the atomic bomb. The blast directly killed 70,000 people, with almost 90% of those deaths being innocent civilians. Despite the immense destruction, the detonation was actually determined to be extremely inefficient, fissioning only 1.7% of its total material. Japan continued to ignore the Allies' demands for surrender, essentially stating that they didn't hear no bell, but they were about to hear something a bit louder. 3 days later, on August 9th, the second atomic bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki after the primary target of Kokura was unable to be seen through the clouds. The blast killed 35,000 people instantly. Truman made the tough decision to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan. But you, on the other hand, have an easy decision: to drop 1 like on this video. Truman did have several more atomic bombs lined up if Japan continued to resist, but on August 15th, 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced his intention to surrender.
そもそも帝国市民の法寧を図り、しかれとも金は自分の文句ところ、耐え難きを耐え。
World War II was over. Following the war, Oppenheimer was deemed the father of the atomic bomb and was hailed a national hero, becoming the face of nuclear energy. That is, until Truman wanted him to develop a much more deadly hydrogen bomb to use against the Soviets. Oppenheimer was like, no. To which Truman responded, "You're fired, Bob!" and immediately had Oppenheimer's security clearance revoked. After being politically blacklisted, Oppenheimer hosted scientific lectures around the world and warned others of the destruction science can have when mixed with politics. Being a heavy chain smoker, he was unsurprisingly diagnosed with throat cancer in 1965 and bit the dust just 2 years later on February 18, 1967 at the age of 62. Oppenheimer's legacy shows the true power of scientific innovation, but how terrifying it can be when weaponized. The bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima mark the only time in history that atomic weapons were used against fellow humans. And for all of our sake, let's hope that it stays that way. Or at least until I can max out my old school RuneScape account.